She called me on a Tuesday evening. Her name is Margaret. She is 67 years old. And she said, "He died last night. I do not know what I am supposed to feel. I want to tell you about Margaret, because what happened to her is something I have since heard from other women. Not often, but enough times to know it is not unusual. And because nobody talks about it, and because the women it happens to are almost always alone with it, I want to say it out loud. Margaret was married for 31 years. She was divorced at 63. The divorce was not sudden. It was the end of a long decline, years of distance, of two people living alongside each other without really seeing each other, of small accommodations that had added up to something neither of them recognized as a marriage anymore. It was sad. It was also, in the end, the right thing. She had known it for a long time before she was able to say it. The divorce was the hardest thing she had ever done. She told me that at the time. She told me again 3 years later when she was sitting across from me at my kitchen table. She said, "I thought the divorce was the worst of it. I thought once I got through that, I had done the hard thing. I thought I was on the other side." And then, 3 years after the papers were signed, her ex-husband died. He was 66 years old. He had been ill for about 8 months, though she had not known the full picture. He died on a Monday night, and she found out the next morning from their daughter. And she did not know what she was supposed to feel. I want to say something about the kind of grief Margaret was carrying, because it is a specific kind with a specific problem. When someone you love dies, when you are the wife, the husband, the partner, there is a social script. People call, people bring food, people ask how you are and expect you to need something. There is bereavement leave. There are rituals. There is a word for what you are, a widow. When your ex-husband dies, there is no script. You are not the widow. The arrangements do not involve you unless there are children, and even then, you are on the outside of the thing. People who loved him are gathering somewhere, and you are not part of that gathering. You were married to him for 31 years. You knew the sound of his breathing at night. You knew which side of the bed he slept on and how he took his coffee and what his face looked like when he was worried about something. You knew him for most of your adult life, and you have no formal place in his death. That is a very specific loneliness. Margaret told me that the first few days she did not tell many people, because when she did tell people, the response was almost always a version of the same thing. "I am so sorry. But you were already divorced, weren't you?" And she would say, "Yes." And there would be a pause, and then the conversation would move on to something else, as though the divorce had canceled the 31 years. As though the fact that it had ended meant she was not allowed to grieve the person. She said, "I could not explain to people why it still mattered. I could not explain it to myself." I want to tell you what those first weeks looked like for her, because I think the texture of it matters. She went to work. She kept her appointments. She cooked dinner. She did all of the things that make up a life. From the outside, nothing looked different. And that was part of the problem, because there was no external structure that said, "You are in grief now, take time, be gentle with yourself." There was no acknowledgement from the world around her that something significant had happened. Her colleagues did not know. Her friends knew, but did not know quite what to say. The few who did reach out were kind, but tentative, checking on her once. And then, when she seemed okay, assuming she was not okay. She was doing a very good impression of okay. She told me she would wake up at 3 in the morning and lie in the dark thinking about things from 30 years ago. Not the bad years, the early years, a particular holiday, a conversation she could not even remember the content of, only the feeling of it. His laugh, the way he used to put his hand on her arm when he wanted her attention. Small things she had not thought about in years that were suddenly very present because they were attached to a person who no longer existed. She said, I felt like I was mourning two things at once. The marriage, which I thought I had already mourned, and him, and I could not separate them. I have thought a lot about what Margaret was actually grieving, because I do not think she was only grieving her ex-husband, as he was at the end. The man who died and the man she had been married to had become, over the years, quite different things. The marriage had ended partly because of that difference. The man who died had been ill and diminished. That was not the man she had loved for 31 years. What Margaret was grieving, I think, was the whole thing. The original marriage. The version of him from before things went wrong. The future they had once believed they were going to have. The particular grief of divorce is that you lose all of that while the person is still alive. And that is its own strange thing. To grieve someone who is still walking around, living their life, making choices that no longer include you. But when he died, something else closed. The small unconscious possibility that had always existed at the back of her mind that there might be some future reconciliation, some understanding, some version where they got to look back on the whole thing together, that possibility was gone. She had not known she was still holding it, but she had been. That was what she was grieving, not only him. The door. I want to say something about what people got wrong when they tried to help. Most of them tried to remind her that the marriage was over, that she had survived the divorce, that she had built a good life since then, that she was going to be okay. All of that was true, but it was not what she needed to hear. She did not need to be reminded that she had moved on. She needed someone to acknowledge that what she had lost 31 years ago and again now was real, that the grief she was feeling was not a mistake, that you do not have to be someone's wife at the time of their death for their death to touch something in you. What she needed was permission to feel what she felt without having to justify it. Her daughter understood. That surprised Margaret, she told me. Her daughter called every day that first week. She did not say, "But you were divorced." She said, "I know you loved him." She said, "You were part of his life for 31 years." She said, "This matters even if it is complicated." And Margaret told me that those words, "this matters even if it is complicated," were the most useful thing anyone said to her. I want to talk about something this brought up for me, about what divorce actually does to love. We have a very tidy idea about this. The idea is that when a relationship ends, the love ends with it. That you file the papers, you grieve the marriage, you move on, and at some point you stop loving the person cleanly, completely. That is the story we tell. But that is not always what actually happens. You can stop being in love with someone and still carry love for them. You can end a marriage and still care, in a quiet way, about whether the person is okay. You can divorce someone after 31 years and still, 3 years later, feel the particular weight of knowing they are no longer in the world. These things are not contradictions. They are just what love actually looks like when it has had 30 years to become part of how you understand yourself. Margaret did not want her ex-husband back. She did not regret the divorce. She had a good life, a quieter life, a life she had made on her own terms, and she valued it. But she had loved him once very much. And the person she had loved, the early version of him, the version from before things went wrong, was someone she had carried with her even after the marriage ended. And now that person was gone, not just absent, gone. That is a grief that has no word for it. And it is real. I know another woman, I will call her Frances, who went through something similar. She was divorced after 22 years. Her ex-husband died 4 years later. And Frances told me that what nobody understood was the specific guilt that came alongside the grief. She said, I kept thinking, did I make his last years harder? Did the divorce take something from him that he never recovered? I do not know if it did. But when he died, I could not stop asking the question, and there was nobody I could ask it to. Not his family, not mine. It felt like a question I had to carry entirely alone. I have thought about Frances's question many times, not because I have an answer to it, but because it illustrates something specific about the grief of losing an ex-spouse. It is not clean. It is full of things that never got resolved, conversations that ended too early, things that were said and things that were not said, the permanent unfinishedness of a relationship that ended by choice rather than by death. When someone dies, the relationship is over in a way it was never over before. Even after divorce, there is still the possibility of a different ending. Death closes that. And everything that was unresolved stays unresolved forever. That particular closure, the foreclosing of every possible future understanding, is one of the things women in this situation grieve without having words for. It is not just the person. It is the version of the story where things eventually made sense. There is something else Margaret told me that I have not been able to stop thinking about. She said, the hardest part was not the grief itself, the grief I could feel. The hardest part was the shame of it. Feeling like I did not have the right, feeling like I should not need anyone to sit with me through this because it was not officially my loss. I have heard some version of that, the grief I do not have the right to, from a number of women over the years. Women who grieve men they were not married to, or men they had separated from, or men who played a complicated role in their lives. The grief is always real. The shame about the grief is almost always also there. The sense that someone else's grief is more legitimate than yours, that you should be fine by now, that the correct response to the relationship ending was to stop carrying it. I want to say this as clearly as I can. Grief does not follow the timeline of your legal status. It does not check whether you are still together before it decides to show up. And the fact that a relationship was difficult or ended badly or ended years ago does not mean its ending, its final permanent ending, will not touch you. If it does touch you, that is not weakness. It is not confusion. It is not you failing to have moved on. It is you being human. It is you having loved someone in your particular and complicated way and feeling the weight of their absence from the world. I also want to say something to the women on the other side of this, the women who are watching a friend or a sister go through something like what Margaret went through and are not sure what to do. Do not say, but you were divorced. Do not say, at least you had moved on. Do not say, you should be okay. You have had years to process this. Say, I know this is complicated and I am not going anywhere. Say, you do not have to explain why this matters. Say, I will sit with you for as long as you need. And if your friend tells you she is fine, if she is doing a very good impression of, okay, check again in 2 weeks, because the grief of losing an ex-spouse often does not hit immediately. It sits quietly for a while, and then it finds you in the middle of an ordinary Tuesday, and it is bigger than you expected. Margaret is doing well now. She told me that last month when we spoke. She said, I am okay. I am actually okay. But I needed that period. I needed to feel it without apologizing for it. She said, I just needed someone to tell me it was allowed. So I am telling you, if you are in something like what Margaret was in, if someone has died and you are not sure you are allowed to grieve them because of the history, because of how it ended, because of what other people will think, you are allowed. You do not need a formal title. You do not need their family's permission. You do not need to have been on good terms at the end. 31 years is 31 years. Love is love. And grief is what happens when someone who was part of your life is no longer in the world. You are allowed to feel it. My name is Patricia Hayes. This is Patricia's Porch, where I believe the most honest conversations are the most useful ones. If this reached you today, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe below, because I am here every week and I would love to keep this conversation going with you. Thank you for sitting with me. I will see you next time.